Now, the BBC and Sky look set to fall out over something else BBC strategy chief John Tate told us in that interview. The BBC have commissioned a firm of consultants to look at what the corporation pays Sky to carry BBC channels on the Sky platform. The report reckons it's about £10 million a year, which A, takes no account of the value to Sky of having the BBC's channels up there in the first place, and B, is unlike the position in any comparable market where, they say, satellite, cable and other platform owners pay so-called retransmission fees to free-to-air broadcasters for the right to carry their channels. This is what John Tate told me yesterday.
I think Sky have done an excellent job. They've taken a lot of risks. They're putting money into UK original content. They're increasing that money, and we welcome that. I think, however, in the context of a very tight licence fee settlement, payment from us to them for retransmitting what are to them highly valuable services is not appropriate.
So is that now the BBC's formal position going into the Communications Act?
Well, we said some time ago, and the Director General said quite clearly this area needs looking at, and I think the other PSBs and Channel 4 and 5 and ITV would also want it looked at.
Have you discussed it with them?
Yes, we've discussed it with them, and I think we'd all agree that the current system is an anomaly. Various measures were taken to get satellite started in the UK, and this was one of them. And it's worked very well, and satellite is now very healthy, and they're making billions of pounds every year. And I think in the context of that profitability and our constrained licence fee, we need to look again at this particular concession.
Well, you want the government to legislate such that you no longer have to pay Sky and Virgin for carriage.
Well, you could consider it deregulatory, Steve, in the sense of allowing an open conversation to take place.
Okay, but here's the question, though. Why can't this just be done by a normal commercial negotiation? If the value to Sky is as significant as you say it is from having the BBC's channels on its platform, and I can see why it might be, they wouldn't necessarily want people exiting the Sky platform to go and find the BBC somewhere else, but never, reducing the customer experience and so on. So I can see why it might be of value. But if it's of value to Sky in the way that you say, then merely just threatening to take it away should produce a commercial outcome, shouldn't it?
Well, that's a good question. The government might want to consider whether it should be left to a commercial conversation within the
Because that's what Sky would say, isn't it? They say, well, look, if you're going to compel us to carry it, then you're going to have to pay us for doing it.
Well, I think, Steve, if it were a commercial negotiation, the distinct balance of advantages to Sky from taking those channels. So that should be reflected in the arrangement. Now, the Director General has said we're not looking for payment. In the case of the BBC, others can state their own positions, but we would look to not have to pay these retransmission fees.
So, over the course of the licence fee settlement, between now and 2017, if this change were to be enacted as you and the other PSBs want, how much revenue would that save the BBC?
Well, I think it's the equivalent of not having to make the reductions in output on local radio that are set out in this plan, plus the reductions of BBC 4, to give you an equivalent service-related figure.
And is that where you put the money?
Overall, roughly £50 million worth.
Over the period?
Yeah.
And what would you do with the £50 million if you had it back?
Well, we could mitigate the sort of cuts I've just described. We wouldn't have to make them.
But in our earlier discussion, some of these cuts, significant numbers of these cuts, sound like good sense in any event.
No, I've been very clear that there are cuts in output that we wouldn't have made but for this new licence fee settlement. And it's in those areas that the money we currently pay to Sky to broadcast our channels could be put to much, much better use.
So, 10 million quid a year minimum, which, as you heard there, he says could be spent on local radio and BBC 4. So, is he right, or is this playing politics? Sky weren't able to join us, but a spokesman did say the BBC chooses to buy platform services from Sky that enable it to provide a wide variety of services on the satellite platform. As with any broadcaster who uses our platform, we ask for a fair and proportionate contribution towards its running costs. Of course, if the BBC no longer wants to buy these services from us, it is free to stop doing so at any point. But these are legitimate operational costs which are regulated by Ofcom, and all broadcasters who choose to use our platform pay them. We don't see the BBC as being the exception to this principle. No one expects the national grid to provide the BBC with cheap electricity, subsidised by its other customers. So why is Sky any different? Well, Matthew Horsman of Consultancy Mediatique is a man who understands these things, and he's here now. Matthew, can you, in Idiot's Guide terms, can you please explain what is this 10 million quid?
Well, the 10 million is the charge that Sky makes to ensure that the BBC service is in the right BBC service is in the right region of the country. So that's the starting point. BBC One.
So all the BBC One regions are all supplied by Sky, are all carried on Sky.
They're all carried, and wherever you happen to be in the country, your set-top box will get the right service. And in general, it's a way of ensuring that the service gets from where the BBC gives it the transponder, the uplink, all the different things that go on technically, and then it's subsumed into the Sky platform. So anyone who has Sky TV gets their BBC service at Channel 101.
And so why shouldn't the BBC pay for that?
Well, right now it has to, and everyone does, by the way. This is not just the BBC. BBC, all the mainstream public service broadcasting channels, and indeed any channel that wants to go onto the Sky platform that isn't retailed by Sky, in other words, isn't part of the pay TV package that Sky sells on to the consumer, all of those channels have to pay their share of what Ofcom has deemed to be an allowable recovery against Sky's investment in the platform.
Right. So, but the argument from the BBC is then that, leave aside what it costs Sky to host the BBC services, that Sky is paying nothing to reflect the value of those services to Sky.
Well, here's where the BBC completely has a point. Sky's viewing, for instance, is pretty indicative of this. On the Sky platform, this is a platform that has maybe 400 channel services. The PSBs, the public service broadcasters, the core ones, BBC 1, 2, RTV, Channel 4 and 5, represent 50%. That's half of all viewing in Sky homes. If you add in the extension channels, BBC 3, 4, ITV 2, 3, 4, etc., it's more than 60%. So Sky, obviously, benefits a great deal from having the channels that people want to watch incorporated into its consumer
But they might
proposition.
say, well, look, all Sky viewers are also licence fee payers. They have no choice but to do that, so that this content is already paid for by Sky's customers, the same as it is by everyone else. So why shouldn't they get it, in inverted commas, free on Sky as they do everywhere else?
Well, this is actually, it comes to a larger point that I think Mr. Tate was making in his comments. The BBC is a bit different from the other PSBs, but look at broadly why this whole argument has come up. And what Tate said about this was that other countries actually have a regime where free-to-air channels, I'll give you the US example, NBC, CBS, NBC, those are all paid by cable operators to be retransmitted to cable
We don't have a lot of
platforms.
time, unfortunately, but in a nutshell, then, what is going to happen here?
There needs to be some kind of guidance from the government, whether in the Comms Bill or through secondary legislation, that says that Sky either is obliged to pay fees or the parties are allowed to commercially negotiate fees with the backstop of saying that they still have access to that platform. There has to be appropriate prominence, must-carry legislation still has to be in place. We think the end game is that Sky will end up not being paid by the BBC and may end up having to pay the other channels.